Thank you all for having me with you this morning. I'm looking forward to the conversation and discussion. I was hoping to get started by everyone just going around our circle and sharing one gift that you gave or received recently that was meaningful to you. It doesn't have to be the biggest gift you received or gave, but just a gift that stands out to you that was meaningful that you gave or received recently.
I can start.
Great.
I gave my daughter and her family a gift that helped them buy a place at the Jersey Shore, so we can be together more. And that's why it's so meaningful.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And as we go around and people share, this could be, it doesn't have to be a big gift. It could be a big gift, but just a gift that was meaningful is how we're welcome to those who just joined us as well. Does anyone want to chime in next? Yes, Diane.
Yesterday, I gave and received the same gift. I spent the afternoon with my husband and my 2 grandchildren at Berry's Tea Room in Flemington. And it was a gift that we gave to our 2 grandchildren. And really, it was a gift for, certainly for us, but absolutely for me, because I got to spend that time with them, honoring their, maturity, their ability to sit for 2.5 hours, dining on tea and biscuits and so forth. So it was just, and having wonderful conversation. So that was the gift, going in both directions.
So nice. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, a delightful young woman.
Would anyone else like to chime in? Yes, Susan.
I was given a gift by a colleague. She was driving from Boston back to Philadelphia, and we arranged to talk about some issues, business issues, and she pulled over, parked her car safely because she knew that I don't like talking to people while they drive. So the gift to me was taking an hour out of this long drive to talk to me, and it was very important, and I'm so grateful.
Wow. Thank you.
Ultimately, and it's really, I'm racing ideas through my mind, but what really comes out is really something that's very global. The gift of just being alive.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Sharon.
I'm sorry, I started a little late. I missed the beginning, but I heard you what gifts you give or receive. I have 4 children and 9 grandchildren, and our gifts for all the holidays and all the birthdays are always do gifts. We do something very special with each other, and they give me do gifts. So I like that very much, whether it's volunteer work or, helping when they're little ones, helping do the dishes. So that's what we give, do gifts.
I like that idea. It's a nice lesson to teach. Yeah, Stephen.
So I'm reminded of what I spoke about this morning, that when COVID hit, one of our members said, here's a membership to Zoom, get onto Zoom. And we pivoted to Zoom, and it changed the course of KHN so dramatically and so positively that we're continuing to use Zoom for so many different things. And we were very early to the game. And it was one of the greatest gifts I've seen in a long time.
one of the things that, especially over the pandemic, is that I've been, more worried about people being able to eat properly. So I've been giving more to a lot of the food banks and places, especially locally, like rolling harvests and things. And so that's been more meaningful, especially when you sort of know some of the people that you're giving to, or at least the organization that you're giving to.
I think the gift that I've received and continue to receive is all the new friends that I've made at the synagogue. I think it's a wonderful thing for me, and it's very supportive. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
I gave a complete set of pots and pans to my 24-year-old grandniece who just set up housekeeping with her not quite fiance. And she didn't ask. She's not officially engaged, so she hasn't gotten presents. And I said, well, how are you going to cook? You're in this apartment, you need this. And I recognized that she, through this pandemic, has navigated moving back in with her parents and then moving out of her parents' house and staying with this wonderful young man that she's going to spend the rest of her life with, hopefully. And I just recognized her for doing all of that and needing something that I was able to supply very quickly just through Amazon. Click and off it went.
Would anyone else who hasn't shared like to share a gift that they gave or received recently that was meaningful? Yes, Sari.
Thanks. Thank you, Rebecca, for teaching with us, for learning with us.
Yes.
One of the things that I'm thankful for is just the friends and family that I have, and how easy to be able to help one another during these times, right? And how much the shul has given to my family. I don't know if Joan's on, but many of you probably remember when like the Yom HaShoah service, and Joan spoke, her mom came and spoke to us, the kids. Maggie remembers that distinctly. And Friday night when I got home from shul, she sent me a picture of 6 Afghanistan pilots and their families that she met at the airport. She and so many others helped them get here. But one thing, I'm going to be sending a package of just a suitcase full of clothes for them, because they're all like Orthodox women, she says, and long skirts, long sleeves, pregnant women, children. Anything, if anybody wants to share, just let me know and I'll meet up with you to get it and send it in the suitcase down to Mag. But she distinctly remembers the picture of Joan's mom on the boat and the comb that was hers to call her own. These little snippets that just, and to be able to act on it. I just can't tell you how proud I am of her and how easy it is to help. So thank you.
It's like, yeah. Alice, may I read what you shared in the chat? Alice just wrote in the chat that she can't say this out loud without crying, but Susan Morris will be driving her to Ben's memorial next Sunday and was just extremely gracious about that, and will be driving her to the school, and that feels like a huge gift. Thank you for sharing that, Alex and Allison. Thank you, Susan.
Sorry to be a downer, guys.
It's not a downer. It's a wonderful gift. I'll try. And Paige, welcome. Hi, we were just sharing as we get started a gift that you have given or received recently that's been meaningful to you. If there's something that comes to mind that you'd like to share, invite you to do so. You don't have to. I'll share one, a gift that I'm working on with some friends for a dear friend of mine whose baby naming I'll be officiating in next week. A friend of mine and my husband's is an artist, and so we're working with her to create a gift for the baby with different symbols that are connected to her family, including her Hebrew name, which will be announced, as well as her Chinese name, all worked into a piece of art. And I think this is the first time I'm working with an artist to commission a small art piece with some friends. And so it feels like a gift to get to work with my friend who's the artist, and I'm very excited to give the gift in a few weeks when it's ready. So that feels like a special gift I've never had the chance to give in this way before. I hope they like it. Feel free to share any other gifts in the chat as we go. I like to open a conversation about tzedakah with talking about gifts, even though we might not, many of us, I think, would consider the gifts that we talked about in the category of tzedakah or giving, others of us not. But it's a way into our conversation about tzedakah and giving this morning. So I think many of us would say tzedakah is a Jewish value. And today I'd just like to explore a handful of different sources in our tradition. And perhaps some of them are sources we're familiar with, perhaps some are new, to see how the conversation about tzedakah has evolved over time in our sources. Tzedakah is a hugely important issue in Jewish tradition, in Jewish sources. So we're just looking at a few, not the holistic, all the rules everywhere, but a few different angles that we can perhaps reflect on over time. I'm interested also in seeing, which of these sources say, okay, yeah, like that makes sense, or which might actually inform our giving or change the way we give or the way that we think about giving. And also welcome any questions and reactions throughout as we go. Anyone have any words they'd like to share in the beginning or opening questions before we dive in? I'm going to share on my screen some of the sources, and we'll go through, we'll read one or two and then have some discussion and see what we move through here. So let me just put this on the screen, and then of course I have to take just a moment to resort all the boxes that move around when Zoom does its thing. Okay, I think you can all see this now. And here we go. I'm just moving everyone back to where you were before I shared. Great, okay. So we're going to start off a little bit in vaguely chronological order by looking at a few sources from Tanakh, from the Torah and books of writings, and then we'll move into some of the later sources where the rabbis reflect on these different laws and try to make sense of what do they mean for us in practice, or at least in theory. We'll read them in English, and I've kept the Hebrew here alongside. Is it big enough? Should I make it bigger? You can see it?
No, make it bigger, please.
Make it bigger, great. Okay, 1 second. Let's see if I can do that. Better?
Okay.
There we go, okay, great. So we'll have to, oops, let me move my screens here and that way we can all see. Okay. 1 second, and I'll just make this, there we go. I think the day that, we don't need to adjust everything on Zoom is like the day we don't need Zoom anymore. Okay. Would someone like to jump in and read for us the source in English? This is from the book of Deuteronomy.
Sure, I'll read it.
Great.
If, however, there is a needy person among you, one of your kinsmen in any of your settlements in the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kinsman. Rather, you must open your hand and lend him sufficient for whatever he needs. Beware lest you harbor the base thought, the seventh year, the year of remission is approaching, so that you're mean to your needy kinsman and give him nothing. He will cry out to the Lord against you, and you will incur guilt. Give to him readily and have no regrets when you do so, for in return the Lord your God will bless you in all your efforts and in all your undertakings. For there will never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor and needy kinsmen in your land.
Wonderful. So this source here, what's being discussed? What are some of the issues at hand here?
To me, it reminds you that there's always need in the community, and God would like you to help take care of the rest of creation with him.
I have a comment. What stands out for me is not terribly positive. It says, if one of your kinsmen is needy. What about the others?
Great, that's an interesting question, and certainly in all of our sources, there's a what's happening in these time periods where these texts have come to be is there's a kind of a tribal type existence among people where there were kinsmen and tribes and a sense of identity among the people who were closest to you, and then a sense of the other, and there's no question that these that all of our sources, there's a privileging of the people closest to you and a sense of responsibility among the people closest to you. And a big question for us today is, well, when we are part of a world where that tribe is much bigger, is this an American tribe, or are we talking about all of America? Are we talking about all Jews? Are we talking about people of the world when we can identify ourselves as kinsmen with a group much larger than when these texts develop? Where does our obligation or end? Who is our kinsman? Who can we say, okay, for this moment, I'm not responsible for this person, or am I? And I mean, here the text, it's translated as kinsman, but the word here is brother. So there's a sense of real closeness about who they're talking about and who you're responsible for. But again, how we understand those terms today and our willingness to broaden them could affect how we're reading what this text is actually asking of us.
Yeah. Question of that. Question of defining kinsman, but the other thing that I looked at this saying is that it tells you how much to give. It tells you to give what's needed rather than picking an amount. You have to see what's needed and give that amount rather than just something that you might think is more appropriate. But that's kind of interesting. That tells you how much to give.
Yeah, I think and in our later sources, there's kind of a how much to give on both ends, like a taxation. We'll see some of our later sources talk about, a certain amount of your wealth or of yourself. So how much to give kind of from yourself. But then there's the additional question of how much to give based on the need. And that comes up again in the Talmud and in some of the later sources. Right. Today, a lot of us, the way we give, we say, okay, I'll write, I'll give an amount of $25, or I'll put some change in my Tzedakah box, or I'll give $1,000. We pick amounts that feel reasonable for us to give and contribute to organizations or individuals. but we know that the need isn't met in that way. And I think one difference in the way that this text is imagining this is, we start from the beginning of the passage, if there is one needy person among you, and then we think of it as, a person coming to you and saying, I'm short this amount. Do we give them the full amount or only part of what they need? And I think when we're dealing in one-on-one, it's a lot easier to meet closer to someone's full need. But the way that many of us give today through organizations where they're meeting a lot of different people's needs, it's a lot harder to know if we've done that, or to know what is that amount, to know that might happen, even if we're not the direct giving directly to an individual. Any other things that of note about this passage?
So to me, it also talks to the lending to your kinsman and then the forgiving and the Shemitah year.
Yeah. Could you say a little bit more about it? Because it's not all spelled out here, but I think Steve's talking about kind of verse 9 here.
Yeah, so in 8, it says, when he comes to you, lend him sufficient for what is needed, meaning that you expect it to be paid back if he can, but every 7 years you forgive debt and you wipe it clean. So it's saying don't begrudge him the timing of his request, because it's going to be forgiven soon.
I love this part. It's like the Torah, it totally gets our human psychology. You lend someone money, at year 1, they have 7 years to pay you back before debts are forgiven. But it's like the Torah gets it. It's like we're gonna be hesitant to say you give someone money in the end of year 6. They're not going to have time to pay it back. Like it knows that, but it's trying to catch us, right? It's like, no, you can't say I'm going to wait until they have more time to pay us back. If there is a need now, no playing trickery with the 7th year Shemitah and forgiveness. Like there's a need. Don't hide away from it. I think there are these fascinating moments where, we sometimes think of the text as out of touch, where it totally gets how human psychology works and how human behavior would, may operate in these types of situations.
Another comment for me. It's really very interesting to grapple with the complexities of what to give, who to give, how much to give, because it really causes us to examine our own motives, our own ideas. But we also have further guides on, you'll probably be getting to that, where this subject has been explored by Maimonides in his Maimonides ladder, which many philanthropic organizations know very deeply. And it really is a wonderful exercise to understand that. In fact, it's really related to the Christian idea of you just don't give away a fish, you teach a person how to fish, that you look for their independence.
Yeah. And right. And this text that we're looking at here doesn't quite get there, but the later sources exploring like what does it mean to actually give so that the person's needs are met acknowledges that we actually need to do more than a quick handout to meet someone's needs, because there will always be people who are needy, right? And this very text acknowledges that. So how do we work toward a situation where there's less of that written out in verse 11? So we'll move to two other texts from the Tanakh, and these are not the exclusive ones. There's many other famous texts talking about tzedakah in our Torah, but these are two other ones that I wanted us to look at. And I think this is something many of us are familiar with, but I'll also just say this before we go too much further. We talk a lot about tzedakah as charity, as things that we give, but the word tzedakah and its root means justice. And so in Judaism, which is why it's a little bit hard to translate tzedakah. And I think this may be something, again, that people are familiar with or have talked about, but charity is not a fair translation of tzedakah. Doing charity is a way of doing tzedakah, or giving charity is a way of doing tzedakah, being philanthropic is a way of doing tzedakah. But the idea of tzedakah is really rooted in justice. And I think some of the concepts talked about here, there are always going to be needy people, but we must always be engaged in providing for our kinsmen, our people, gets closer to what it means to continue to pursue this idea of tzedakah. So we're talking more today about money and giving in that regard, but know that this concept is deeply rooted in what it means to have a fair and just society. All right, so here are two other sources that discuss the issue of giving and what it means to have a just society in our Torah. Would someone else like to read the verses from Leviticus?
When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, the Lord, am your God.
So this text in the Hebrew doesn't actually use the word tzedakah, so that it doesn't say, and as a reminder, this is one way that we pursue tzedakah, it's by doing this, right? The Torah doesn't always spell things out for us, but as we think about what does justice look like in our society, what does tzedakah and providing for those who are needy, certainly these concepts stand out. So any thoughts about this passage? Yes.
I feel like I love this passage because it helps me or any of us to see that any time that we are receiving, if we think of ourselves as part of something larger, that it becomes like a communal receiving. So that if I'm taking or receiving, at any given moment, I'm thinking, oh, how is this affecting others? And how can I do something that keeps me part of society in a communal responsibility kind of way, just in the most basic way of getting your food even. So I like the philosophy behind this.
Doesn't this also talk to greed, that you shouldn't be so intent on getting everything you can, that enough is sufficient?
Yeah. Right. I mean, and you think about in the case of this harvest, like your family only eats as much as they eat. You harvest a little extra, you don't need to eat the rest of it. So what would they do? They would sell it, and just kind of extra money or however that would work out in this kind of context. And so, right, this idea is enough is enough, and part of my responsibility is to provide for others.
This also addresses sort of Abraham's first question about what about kinsmen. This is actually saying this is for the poor and the stranger. So this is how you take care of other people rather than just your own kinsmen, your own tribe.
I also love the tie-in with Ruth, where she's gleaning behind the pickers, and that leads to a marriage.
Yeah. Yeah, Diane.
I guess what I'm thinking about while I'm listening to all of this is, what is our responsibility if we are the recipient of gifts of charity? First of all, how do we go about asking for it? Are there any Talmudic help for someone who needs help? How do we resolve the feelings that we have in terms of asking for help? And then what is our responsibility in terms of repaying it or not repaying it, or accepting it graciously and moving on with our lives, or what?
That's a wonderful question. I don't know that the sources that I have pulled for us are going to address some of those, but I'm really interested in looking into some more of that, because I think that is a critical piece of this. Is acknowledging that we are kind of part of the full circle, and at different moments in our lives are both giving and receiving, and that's kind of an important part of being a full community. Yeah, thank you for raising those questions, and I'm curious as we go through, and if any of the sources do maybe speak to some of those questions.
I note the way this passage doesn't talk about picking everything and then giving a certain amount away, that you leave some of it there. And so it puts some of the onus on the person who needs the nutrition to come and collect it. And because it's stated the way it does, there is no shame in doing that. It's almost like an invitation. We're told to leave some there, and you are invited to come and collect what you need.
Yeah, I think in part answer to some of Diane's question, the dignity of the person receiving charity the sources attempt to preserve that in many ways possible. And I think this text as well, right? It doesn't say, it just says, don't go all the way to the edges. It doesn't say, leave the rotten tomatoes behind, right? It's the idea that the dignity should be preserved. You picked and you ate, and others are welcome to pick and eat. And that act of collecting makes the recipient a little bit more active in the process of receiving. So I think there are some things we can glean from the way this talks about how the person receiving tzedakah in this case should be treated. Yeah, Abraham.
I have a further comment analogous, and I really always enjoy pointing out comparable situations in other cultures. When Sharon and I were fortunate enough to go to Nepal, one of the things we learned about that Buddhist society, there's a practice where you will leave some money, and we actually did that, just like by the side of the road or stick it in the crack of a fence for somebody to come by if they need it. They just help themselves, but you plant a gift to anonymously.
Mm-hmm. Mm. That's very beautiful. Yeah. Let's move on to our next text here from Proverbs. Could someone read this line?
Ill-gotten wealth is of no avail, but righteousness, tzedakah, saves from death.
So there's a little bit more context here that's not included, but this idea of tzedakah, tatzil mimavet, that saves from death, is really, it's a bit obscure. Like what does that mean? We know that tzedakah does not quite save someone from dying. People, we eventually die, but this concept of tzedakah, saving from death, has been really picked up, in this idea of tzedakah as a redemptive act. So one of the questions we're thinking about in talking about this class is, where do some of our traditions come from? And one tradition that we have in Judaism that isn't a commandment, that isn't like we have to do it in this way, is about giving tzedakah in honor of someone who has died. And the practice derives from some of these verses of the idea of tzedakah as a redemptive act, that we are engaging in kind of redeeming of the souls of those who have died. And some of that derives from some of these verses of the idea of tzedakah being a saving act. And this verse also speaks to the question of kind of honesty and wealth, and that the righteous behavior is counter to that. So I want to move on and look at some of our other sources, but we can keep this.
I would like to comment on that.
Yeah, sure.
There are many, the robber barons fleeced America and then became heroes by building libraries and things like that. I'm also reminded of a little story that Sharon told me. I don't know whether it's true or not, but Mother Teresa was criticized for accepting gifts from the mafia. And she justified that. Just, I can't really tell exactly where this comes from, but look at what this money does. So it creates a whole conundrum of what is it pure? I mean, we get into purity things. Is the donation pure or not?
Yeah, that is one of the hugest topics of right, the blood money, or what do we do? Is money just money when we receive it? Does it matter how it was earned? Yes, Diane.
In a more modern day example, the Sackler family, who were the people who owned the pharmaceutical company that sold all those opioids over these past number of years, and knew that they were addictive, really have funded enormous charity things, libraries. Their names are on libraries and museums and all sorts of things. And it's just a modern day example of that exact thing.
Yeah, and there are unfortunately unlimited examples of unethical wealth earning and good, and yet we can't deny that good has been done with some of that wealth. How is that just the way of the world? Is that does that make that that research lab, that library, less in our eyes? I don't know that there are good answers to a lot of those questions, but it's extremely pervasive in our society, for sure. So the next source that we can look at is going to build off of and kind of add a bit of a story or a little context to this line from Proverbs. So I wanted to look at this, and I wanted to say, I know many people here have engaged in Talmud study, but I wanted to say a word about one way that I'm looking at some of the sources in the Talmud as they're talking about issues of tzedakah and justice. The rabbis who wrote down and codified the oral law in the Mishnah, and then further elaborated on these laws in the Talmud, we're doing a couple of things. They were trying to create laws for what they believed would be a just society, and that was kind of a critical process and goal for them. But it's important to note that with all of the detailed laws that they worked out, that the society that they were envisioning didn't fully come to fruition in many cases. A lot of times the laws that they were coming up with was like kind of pontificating, sitting in a room. If I'm sitting here designing a just Jewish society, how would it look? And how should we ideally shape our society so that it's just? And so some of the scenarios that they wonder about, like, they didn't necessarily happen or come to full fruition, but they were kind of mental exercises around the issues of justice and how to create a fair society. So that if indeed the rabbis had the kind of governing power that they imagined themselves having as they were writing and developing these laws, that they would be able to create a set of laws that people would really want to abide by. So I think that there's a kind of twofold way to look at some of the passages in the Talmud around issues of tzedakah and around a lot of issues of law, which is that the rabbis cared deeply about justice and wanted to figure out, like, what is a just society? How do we create that from the laws in the Torah, from our understanding of the Torah? But the other piece is that they wanted to create, they wanted others in society to perceive them as just. And that's kind of the other side of it. They wanted the laws, they wanted to develop a set of laws so that people would buy into it and say, oh yes, the rabbis are just and have our justice in mind, and we should therefore follow them. We should follow these laws, and we should try to enact these laws should we have the opportunity. So kind of trying to distinguish, not that the rabbis who were writing the Talmudic laws were kind of devious in that way, but that they have both pieces in mind, both the actual creation of a just society and getting the buy-in that people think that they do have, that the rabbis do have their best interests in mind. And I think that comes up in some of the sources that we can see that there's an interest in both justice and the idea that they are pursuing justice. So let's take a look at this passage from the Talmud. Would someone like to read it? It goes just a little bit beyond what you can see on the screen there as well.
Excuse me, I'll read.
Thanks.
It is taught that in Bareta that Rabbi Yehuda says, great is charity in that it advances the redemption. As it is stated, so said the Lord, uphold justice and do charity, for my salvation is near to come and my righteousness to be revealed. He would say, 10 strong entities were created in the world, one stronger than the other. A mountain is strong, but iron, which is, but iron which is stronger cleaves it. Iron is strong, but fire melts it. Fire is strong, but water extinguishes. Water is strong, but clouds bear it. Clouds are strong, but wind disperses them. Wind is strong, but the human body withstands it. The human body is strong, but fear breaks it. Fear is strong, but wine dispels it. Wine is strong, but sleep drives it off. And death is stronger than them all. But charity saves a person from death, as it is written, and charity delivers from death.
How does this passage help us make sense of, or if not make sense of the passage, make sense of how the rabbis are understanding the passage? I think one thing that I pull out from this text is just how we're talking about a mountain, wind, cloud. I mean, these forces in the time periods that we're talking about are, incredibly powerful. There is not the human architecture and to beat some of these forces that we're talking about, flame retardant material, didn't exist in the way that we have it now, right? These are extremely powerful forces, and yet at the end of all of this list is the idea of tzedakah. So from this, I really just see how important this idea of tzedakah is in the Jewish understanding in the communities, and that our laws and the work of the rabbis in designing this society, how important tzedakah is and how much it needs to be elevated. And the reason I think that's important is because the laws then that deal with tzedakah are of really huge consequence. If we're talking about tzedakah being redemptive or saving from death in some way, again, we might not understand that literally, but there's a really significant consequence here, given how important tzedakah is to the rabbis, which they are deriving, from the text, including the one that we looked at in Proverbs. So I think I collected sources for like a 3-hour discussion of this topic, which we're not going to do. Diane, do you want to jump in and say something?
Yes. So turning that on, looking at the other side of that coin.
Yeah.
What I was thinking was that does it follow that if I allow someone to give me charity, that I'm also giving them charity to allow them to do that? or ask them to do that, that it's a gift, in a way, if I could wrap my brain and heart around that, that it's a gift to give someone the opportunity to give charity, that in itself is charity.
Yes, I do think so. And I think I have a source here that kind of speaks to that question. So I'm just trying to look over that idea. But yes, I think there is a dual role in the person who allows charity to happen. And we see that in the text talking about the ability to kind of empowering and inspiring others to give, so that there is greater reward when one multiplies charity. And I think the text talks more about it in terms of the giving, but I think we as a full society need to understand that we can't give in the abstract, that we are giving to people. And so there needs to be a willingness to receive, and in order to be able to complete that cycle.
I think also when we think of charity, we think of money all the time, or volunteering or something. But it's also the concept from the other perspective is that, no, I can do that myself. I'm not going to ask anybody to do that for me. I have to do this myself. And, you know, this kind of gives us permission to say, yes, you can help me. I actually do need this help, or want this help, or I can use this help.
This is where Maimonides comes to the rescue, because he offers anonymous giving.
Right. I agree that the Maimonides really does speak to this question of being able to give anonymously, because by preserving, there's a lot of concern about the dignity of those receiving, and that if someone is in need, that they should be able to receive, and in order to do that, we need to preserve their dignity. And this issue of personal dignity is pretty critical in our sources, and I think we need to then extrapolate, what does that mean for us today? And you know, when our society looks a little bit different than the way that things are described in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, how do we, what is our obligation around a personal dignity today? And maybe, to Diane's point, that includes saying to our friends and family, those closest to us who will hear us, if you need, you should ask. We're here to give, you know, that this exists, and making that aware. You know, most synagogues, most communities, you know, you can ask, and there's an opportunity to receive, but making that known, so that people know that there is an opportunity to ask. And I think there's some ways that we want to think about in our day-to-day lives. How do we make it known to people, to preserve their dignity, that there's an opportunity to receive? Judy, did you want to chime in? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. So I was thinking of what Diane said as being something that sometimes it's existing in our society, but we've had these patterns for so long that we don't recognize the opportunities are there for it to be more of a natural relationship than a signing of a check or giving to an organization or someone having to present their need. So recently I have been reading this book. I'm just going to show you guys. I don't know if you see, The Slaughterman's Daughter, which was written in Hebrew, and it's about translated into English, and it's about the shtetls and things that are happening in Poland, where this very concept of tzedakah is so natural to their society that you don't really have to ask. If you see that a person obviously doesn't have food, or they're near your house, or it's Shabbat, this is natural within the society for one to offer and the other to accept. And these roles are not as strained as we're talking about it today, but more incorporated. So another modern day interpretation of that is, right, I live near the Lawrenceville School, and they raise their own crops for their food, and they have an environmentally organic farm, and it's part of what they want people to learn, sustainability. And when they harvest their food, if they have anything left, they put it on a Thursday in front of the school for people to be able to come and take from that. So no one has to ask. And it's a natural part of giving back to the society. And I think we do have this way of giving, but we're just not thinking about that. And if we start thinking about that more, especially during COVID, we were finding places to put food and people could just come on a certain day and get that food. Because obviously, rather than having to ask for it on Wednesday, it'll be here or whatever, at least in this area around Trenton, that happened a great deal. So I'm feeling that we need to, as Jews, get back to that more natural way of doing that and completing the cycle. I see it as not just the giver or the taker, but as a circle, not as a, yeah, I've given mine, I can pat myself on the back for that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that example and raising that larger question. And one of the pieces that I think that that Judy is bringing out is that when we think about, you know, and even in the context of talking about like a learning session on Tzedakah, a lot of times we come back to, okay, how do I want to give differently? What are going to be my personal practices? How might I, you know, allocate, whether it's time, money, resources, how might I ask for help when I need it in different ways? We're thinking about it from the I, the individual. And I think what Judy is pointing out, and I think that a lot of the Jewish laws around Tzedakah agree with, is that it's a communal piece. It's not just something that I, as a one person, can do. It's really the questions that are asked of our entire communities, how our communities function. And I know KHN also sees that as a responsibility. There's so much work done with, you know, soup kitchens and partnering, and that's not work that one person can do. It's really the work of a full community, because the onus is too large on one person, and it really requires kind of communal infrastructure. What can we do, not just what can I do? I think that's one of the questions as we think about how to do tzedakah differently. It's sometimes the we and not just the I, even though we also have individual roles in this. I wanted to share, yeah, Miriam.
Most of you have already heard me talk about the work that I do with the Mexican community in Lambertville. But when I was a kid growing up, I don't remember tzedakah being shoved down our throats. I don't remember it at all, and yet it became a very strong part of me. And when the pandemic hit, the first thing I thought of was, oh my God, all these people are going to be laid off. They need food. And so I started doing these mammoth shopping trips at Costco and delivering food to the two families I was involved with. And one of the things that Judy touched on, which was the pride and dignity of the people, one of the families, the mom has basically pulled back. And I have always sensed that she was very, very proud and is just in way over her head. And whenever I have communicated with her, which is through my broken Spanish or Google Translate, I always try to emphasize that somebody helped my family in the late 1800s when they came here. And I'm just doing something similar now because I can, and try to compliment her on how marvelous her children are. And I don't know if it's working or not. I haven't seen her or her kids for a few weeks now. But somehow or other, these feelings got instilled into me, or they were born in me. I don't know, because I really don't remember it being taught. And I don't remember the examples being set either. I mean, my parents gave to Jewish causes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that example. And I think what you're doing, it can be challenging because not many of us don't always feel that close enough connection that we're able to give directly in that way. And I think the concepts of tzedakah are asking for both that individual responsibility to our kinsmen and how do we create societies where people's needs are taken care of. So I wanted to highlight just a line from this passage on the screen here that Rabbi Elazar says, one who causes others to perform a good act is greater than the one who performs the act themselves. And so this idea of tzedakah, and this is one of the questions I have around anonymous giving, like a genuine question around anonymous giving. So Abraham has alluded a few times to the Maimonides ladder, and I brought a line from that. Let's see if that's down here. Yeah, this is this text. So from Maimonides, who came much later than the Mishnah and the Talmud sources. Maimonides kind of saw the world getting out of control in his mind, like in Jewish practice and Jewish behavior. And he realized that people were not educated enough to study the Talmud themselves and needed more specific codes of law to say, you know, do this, don't do this. And so in his ample spare time, he was an extremely busy person, kind of like superhuman, was a doctor, a scholar, counseled people, kind of to his own physical and sort of mental emotional detriment, and nonetheless provided us with these codes of Jewish law, which are still used today to make it just a little bit clear, because the Talmud's a little bit convoluted. Like, what does it mean that we should actually do? And he helped clarify that in his perspective. So speaking to the idea of tzedakah, this idea of giving anonymously. Let's see where that line is here. I mean, so this piece speaks to some of what we were talking about with dignity. Anyone who gives tzedakah to a poor person with a scowl or causes him to be embarrassed, it loses the merit of having given in the first place. And then the passage continues here, but this is the start of this Maimonides ladder that Abraham was alluding to, that there are 8 levels of tzedakah, each one greater than the other. And the highest above them all is to fortify a fellow Jew, giving them the gift or a loan or a partnership until they're strong enough that they don't need to ask for sustenance. And then there are 8 levels or 7 levels, I guess, below this concept of the teach a person to fish, which is considered the highest level that we can do for someone. And others are, I'm happy to share that resource if people are interested and haven't seen it. I can send that around, because it does break things down nicely in terms of giving begrudgingly, or giving, that doesn't really, like, it's good, but it doesn't count in the same way. And so those are some of the questions that he deals with that give us some of these, like, how do we actually go about giving? But it doesn't answer all of our questions about what it means to kind of create a just society, because we need systems in place. So I want to there are many different pieces we could continue to look at here, but I want to close with a passage that I spent some time with studying recently. Well, 2 things. I'm going to sneak this one in. So one of the other ways that giving is examined here is what is our obligation when we when do we stop? How much do we keep giving? And that is a question. And I think burnout is a concept that's been spoken about a lot especially when giving in some way is our professional work, if we're giving of our time. So that one should not dispense more than 1/5 of one's money to charity, so that you don't become needing of charity yourself, because there is an understanding that if everyone put themselves in a situation where they needed charity from society, that would kind of weaken the structure of society. And here, like, there's kind of a communal awareness. I think today, if someone was giving a lot, like, we wouldn't necessarily know, did they give 1/5? Did they give more than 1/5? We wouldn't necessarily know if someone is giving of themselves too much, because we're not necessarily aware of people's financial situations in the way that, this passage understands it. But I think we are aware of when someone is giving too much of themselves. I think we can look around in our community and say, you know, this person is showing up to Shabbat services and they look like they're about to collapse because they've been so busy helping others. Have they perhaps crossed that 1/5 threshold? Do we have a responsibility as a community or as this person's friend to say, you know, hold on a second here, like maybe it's time to take a break? That's not what this passage is talking about. It's talking about money, but I kind of understand it in our society as how do we look out for people so that we can continue to give and we can continue to support our communities. So I think that's one interesting angle on how much do we give? How do we know when to stop? Here's a perspective. Any quick reactions to this piece and this source?
It's like the
So-
analogy here is for the parent to put on their oxygen mask on the plane first.
Yeah, I do. I think that is a relevant one.
So I think Abraham raises a really good point that is tzedakah something that is outside your family, or is it something that includes your family? In other words, I think if you start to make community, the concept of community start from within a family, and you draw it out sociologically, then you see the amount of energy in terms of support and financial support and giving much greater at the innermost circle, and almost as you would see water dispense energy going out in a pool. And I'm wondering how that's addressed in the Torah and the obligation to take care of your family, which at that time they were very large maybe, and maybe we still have very large ones in religious communities, smaller maybe in ours. And then the reluctance of how do people decide where they do give their resources? Is it all within their family, or as Miriam was describing, to a community, and make these decisions because we have these unbelievable economic disparities in this country between the resources that those who have and those who have don't. And my second part to that is this speaks mostly to the Jews. And where do we change that from just our kinsmen to everyone outside of that? And I know from American Jewish World Service, when my daughter started to work there, they were first just serving Jewish communities, and then it became everyone in the world. So if you would address both of those, you know, because I think that in our real world is what happens usually. You would give to your child or to your grandchild or to someone in need there, but what about the other? Where do we draw that distinction?
I think, yeah, that is a wonderful question. I think some of our larger Jewish philanthropic organizations like HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and the American Jewish World Service have answered that kind of clearly in their minds to say, we've given to Jewish communities, we still give to Jewish communities in need, but now our responsibility to our kinsmen is global, and we need to look beyond where there is dire need, where we have expertise around immigration and resettling refugees. There aren't so many Jewish refugees anymore, but there are acute needs of refugees in other places, and the answer of tzedakah is then to serve those. And I think many Jewish leaders have answered the question that way. Not to say that there isn't still acute needs in the there aren't still acute needs in the Jewish community in other ways. I know that we're running a little over. I will wrap us up in the next 4 minutes here, so everyone can go have lunch. There, just want to close with just 2 pieces, more food for thought than answers for some of these. But one thing that Abraham shared about the community in Nepal and other practices. This week I was studying a little bit about Islam, and one thing that stood out to me maybe if I hadn't, well, I guess the words would have given it away, but that Islam has some really similar understandings about tzedakah and justice, and even the same word tzedakah, zakat, exists in Islam. And we're not going to go in and talk about all of these pieces, but I just wanted to share in terms of interreligious practices that some of these things that and there's a lot more literature about how to give and the requirement to give within Islam, but thought it was interesting that this idea of tzedakah and zakat exists across religions. So and this is specifically speaking to here about receiving zakat, but there's also instructions around giving. And there's a little bit more of a tithing concept in Islam, certain pieces that are required to give, but it speaks to some of the same categories that we think about. So I just wanted to share that briefly, even though we don't have time to go into a full discussion. So some of these categories are people living in absolute poverty, and even I think of interest is the tzedakah or zakat collectors themselves, and people who the idea of someone who needs to be freed from slavery or bondage, kind of this understanding that if there's no way that someone would have had resources. So anyway, I wanted to just share some of those as food for thought and further reading for those who are interested. And we'll close with one other source here. Here we go. So this is from a similar section. We've been looking at different laws about giving, and this really comes back to the communal piece, which is something that's come up. When I think about tzedakah, a lot of times I'm approaching it to think like, how can I give differently? How am I going to prioritize my giving? And one of the challenges for us is to say, well, again, how do we do this actually as a community? And it's not just about me and about my own behaviors. So there's an idea of a communal charity fund, which is collected by two people and distributed by two people. So that through, on a weekly basis, people in the community would go around kind of collecting tzedakah and passing, and then kind of redistributing it from people. And there's both a kind of a pot for food, either people giving actual food before Shabbat because there might not have been time to make food for Shabbat, even if one had money to purchase it. There's not the same kind of quick purchase of food that we have in today's society. And what I really like about this passage here, this idea that the charity fund is collected by two and distributed by three, collected by two because you're not appointing kind of a singular authority over the community of fewer than two people. And there's a lot that we can read into this concept, but I think one, it shows that the idea of tzedakah is not just about charity, but it's about justice. It's about honesty. If one person is just responsible for tzedakah and giving, how do we know that it's done honestly? How do we know that someone's not kind of pocketing a little piece of it? And so it's about setting up systems of trust that there should be multiple people, so that there's no question that it's being done as a team, it's being done collaboratively, that the need is being seen, and that it's a trusting system. And I think that's another important piece of how we give, is that, right, that they're trusting that money's not being stolen from people and being redistributed, that when we give, it's being done through a lens of fairness and trust, and that there's a sense of justice throughout our giving. So that's a piece that I find kind of interesting, that I think is a little bit different than how we might think of, my personal giving. When we do it collectively, how is it done in a way that is fair both to the givers and to the receivers? So as we enter in and continue in the month of Elul and think about what we want to do differently, I just wonder how we can raise some of these questions about dignity and justice in our giving, both as givers and receivers. And I'll be happy to share some of these other sources that we didn't get to, or ones to dig into further, as well as the Maimonides ladder, which was alluded to. I can send that out if anyone's interested in perusing or having kind of further discussion.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's excellent. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me with you this morning. Really enjoyed being together.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. It was wonderful. And
Yes.
I hope the baby's great.
Oh, the baby's great. He's still napping, so hey, look, good for him. And I wrote down that book you mentioned, Judy. That sounds interesting.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. It's very interesting.
Thank you.